welcome. We're very happy to have you here today with us for this Middle East Peace Civic Forum critical conversation. So this is the third in our series, or excuse me, our third series, and it's the second episode of the third series. And our guest today is Mazin Qumsiyah. Welcome, Mazin.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're
Thanks.
very welcome. We're looking forward to a wonderful discussion. Our facilitator and my co-host today is Peter Van Geldern. Peter and I were co-founders in the current iteration of the Middle East Peace Civic Forum, and we go way back. We've done a lot of good work together, and hopefully we'll do a conversation that is really worthy of what we're up to here. So. I don't think anybody has all the answers, and we're not pretending that we do, but if we can have a conversation that moves the needle, I think we've accomplished something. So, welcome today. I'll say just a few opening remarks, and then I'll turn it over to Peter, and then we'll hear from Mazin. So, let's see where to begin. So, we get to transcend tribalism. We've got the Jewish people and the Palestinian people, but really the truth is it's such a diverse set of communities, just tremendous diversity, but also a lot of tribalism. So if we can embrace kind of a common purpose today of the Abrahamic family, the human family, and common thing that we're up to. We still get to take pride in our tribes, but I think if we can really embrace the peace tribe and the human tribe, that would be really some very good progress. So, as I said, our intention today is to have a deep dive, more than just the surface level, but to really have a deep dive and look at the core of the issues and see how we can move that needle. So, we'll talk about human rights and many other topics today. But the conversation is more than just about the surface level and the words. We want to go deep and look at what are the concepts that you've spoken about and written about, like dignity, opportunity, respect, rights, and responsibilities. And at the end of the day, Israelis and Palestinians are going to have to figure out some way forward. So we don't want a dystopia. It could get worse. So we think that could be avoided. So we can do better. We have to listen to people that we may disagree with. I'm sure there will be views expressed today that either I or someone watching will find triggering, and that's okay. I think we need to have those conversations, and being peacemakers is not just about sitting around singing Kumbaya with a guitar. That whole concept sort of makes me nauseous. It's like we got to really have the difficult conversations about real issues, and that's going to involve disagreements and different views. So that's okay. So we invite everyone here today and everyone watching to be okay with that level of what sometimes can get conflictual. We might get triggered, and that's okay because we're coming from that common context. So, with that said, I think that's the perfect opportunity to get started. What is the context we're creating today? So, Peter will be our expert facilitator along with me, and we get to have a really thoughtful discussion. So, just a few words about Mazin's qualifications and experience. So, you're a professor at Bethlehem University, a very prolific author. We could spend the whole hour and 15 minutes today just going through your experience and the things that you've written about. But you were born in Beit Sahur in Palestine, just not too far from Jerusalem and Bethlehem. You're a political scientist and author and founder and director of the Palestine Museum of Natural History and the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University. You've been on the faculties of University of Tennessee, Duke University, Yale, and you've gotten degrees from, I saw, the University of Connecticut, which is where I'm from and where Peter is living and speaking with us today, and where I spent some time. So, really just a very rich background. If there's anything more you'd like to add, Mazin, feel free. But with that, I'll turn it over to Peter.
Welcome. Yeah, I'm excited about today's uh, critical conversations because it's part of this series created by our team. Some of them here, Jess and Larry, and Waleed, putting together a series of what we call solutions, but really like what are the paths to peace and what's going to work. And so finding solutions and or just finding structures and systems that can move us towards peace. So I'm really grateful for you coming today. The format is fairly open right now. We're gonna look at your book. So I put in the chat for everyone here. You graciously have published your book for free online, and so people who want to read your work, it's available. And on the last chapter of your book, you talk about sharing the land of Canaan, and also about um, like using human rights and maybe international law as a way and a path to peace. So this is a great topic because it transcends a lot of the tribalism, and it puts us all in the big platform of all being human. So I like this topic very much. So today this is really your opportunity to maybe introduce yourself a little deeper, Mazin. I don't know if we really did you justice, but give us a little more context, and then I'm gonna, and after that we're gonna kind of chime in with basically these last few chapters of the last few topics in the last chapter of your book, where you really summarize the solution through human rights. So yeah, why don't you get started? We also will open it up to Q&A at the end. So please hold your questions, but write them down if something comes up for you. And then I'm sure we can kind of get into a more open conversation after we dig a little deeper with Mazin.
I will try to be very brief and quick about it. My background is in biology and medical genetics, and I apply this background of biology and medical genetics and scientific thinking to also social problems. This maybe is the part that's unusual. I think scientifically about problems like the ones that you are interested in. So I address those things from a background of knowledge-based solutions, and knowledge-based solutions. From my childhood, I've been interested in biology. My background is as a Palestinian Christian, but fortunately, because my father is Greek Orthodox, my mother is Lutheran, these are the two extremes of Christianity. They didn't take us to church. That was their compromise. So they told us when we grow up, we can decide what we want to do. And so I grew up in a essentially secular home with limited, any kind of indoctrination, any particular religious, or for that matter, political ideology. In fact, my parents were trying to insulate us from the horrors that are around us. And really, it was fortuitously that I discovered some information for myself that my parents never told me about, like, for example, that my mother lost her best friend when 1948 in the massacre of Deir Yassin. So it was these kinds of discoveries were done through research, if you want, that is not directly from my parents or from other people that I interacted with who essentially were not involved in this kind of political activism. And my first political activism was actually not even for Palestine. It was for South Africa when I finished my bachelor degree and I went to the United States, and I wanted to be popular with the girls. So I ended up running for president of the International Student Association at the University of Connecticut, I was elected president of that. And I thought that was great. This way I get to meet girls as I was 22, 23 years old. So anyways, but then this Nigerian guy comes to me and he says, congratulations that you are our president. What are you going to do about South Africa? And I was so naive and ignorant of the world. I said, what's wrong with South Africa? So he educated me. This is 1980, I'm talking about 44 years ago. So he educated me, and we ended up bringing a speaker who was originally from South Africa, but was in exile in London. Later, I found out that he was a member of the African National Congress, which at the time was considered a terrorist organization by the US. So anyways, that's how I got into organizing, if you want. But then, I realized, and thanks to this guy from London that we brought, the South African who was living in London, he educated me about the importance of learning about history. And I went back to read Palestinian history and what happened in our region. I found that a lot of the information I received in school is simply not correct, and that there's a lot of misinformation in all these textbooks that they teach us in, about the origin of our people, all this stuff. There's even Zionist propaganda in Palestinian textbooks. So I had to relearn based on information and knowledge. And then when I went into medical genetics much later in my career, beyond the basic science, I went into actual medical services. I realized that there's medical tools that we can use to dissect, if you want to use that terminology, the situations. So as a medical geneticist, we follow the 5 pillars of modern medicine, which is patient history, symptoms of the current illness, and then you make the right diagnosis, and then you offer therapy, and then you say what the prognosis is going to be. So if you apply the same methodology in a meticulous way and careful way, you realize that one of the most important things, and the reason you would go to patient history, is to understand that there's no congenital problems that would be more difficult to correct if you want. But then the symptoms help you arrive at proper diagnosis. And then you can talk about therapy and prognosis, because if, as a medical doctor, some patient comes with some symptoms and I make the wrong diagnosis, it doesn't matter how good my therapy is. If it's for the wrong diagnosis, it's not going to work. So I think it's important to make the right diagnosis. And I won't belabor this and give you, the patient history and some of the symptoms. I mean, the symptoms, you see them every day now. It's genocide and ecocide, medicide, destruction of healthcare services, ethnic cleansing. All of these things are symptoms of the violence and the counter-violence from all sides, if you want. And it's plural, by the way. I reject this duality of thinking about Israeli versus Palestinians, or the Jewish people versus the Palestinian people. There's no such thing. There is thousands of sides, if you want, thousands of ideas and concepts about these things. This is not a tribal conflict, no tribalism here. Unless some people think of themselves as a tribe, but that's their problem, not my problem. I do not think of myself as a tribe or anything like that. And to me, Jewish individuals are like Christians, like my family, or Muslims, or Baha'i or Druze or atheists for that matter. They are individuals who follow certain ideologies and concepts of themselves, and that can be very variable depending on who you talk to. Certainly among the Palestinians, the ideas of, let's say, Hamas is different than the ideas of Fatah and different than the ideas of whatever, and other factions or independents like me. In terms of the Israeli public, if you want, their ideas can be, like Smotrich and Ben Gvir and Netanyahu, or they can be ideas of Martin Buber and Judas Magnus, and anything in between. All sorts of ideas and concepts. It's not a tribe in that sense, because also it's not a tribe with various ideas either, because I know that some Palestinians are closer to some Israelis than either is to the other sides of the Israeli spectrum, if you want, or the Palestinian spectrum. So, but anyway, I digress. Basically, to go back to the medical analogy, you need to make the right diagnosis. And what's a diagnosis? It's very simple. It's called displacement settler colonialism. And it's an idea that we need the Jewish state for the reasons I'm happy to discuss. I mean, there was discrimination of Jews in Europe in the 19th century after the empires dissolved. And so when the empires dissolved, then Europe created concepts called nation states. And nation states, by definition, unlike empires, are more racist and discriminatory against minorities. The emperor didn't care whether you were Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Protestant, whatever, as long as you didn't disobey the emperor. But in a nation-state concept, you had the concept where you want to make the country uniform, so Germany, Poland, etc. That involved discrimination against minorities, and that's why we see discrimination against minorities in Europe increase in the 19th century, whether it's Protestants in majority Catholic countries or Catholics in majority Protestant countries, or Jews or Gypsies or Muslims or others. Anyways, for the Jews of Europe, the majority of them fought against discrimination or moved from one place to another. But there was a minority, they called themselves Zionists, after the Zion, a mountain. This, by the way, an Aramaic word, not a Hebrew word. Zion is a location, not a religious connotation. And Zion, Mount Zion, is in the area of Jerusalem. And this is basically an Aramaic term. But anyway, they called themselves Zionists, and their idea was, let's make a Jewish state. Just like there is a Polish state and a French state, we might as well have a Jewish state, because those countries discriminate against Jews. And the area they chose, Palestine, was 97% not Jewish. So how are you going to take a country that's multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, and even multilingual, by the way? More than 44 languages spoken in Palestine before 1948. How are you going to take a country like that and make it the Jewish state of Israel? Well, there was differences of opinions. Again, it's not tribal thing. It's just logical thing. It's there was differences of opinions. There were people like Martin Buber who thought very differently than people like Ben Gurion or Herzl. The latter two advocated ethnic cleansing. Others did not advocate. They advocated Zionism that integrates with the local people. But the political Zionism, the idea of a Jewish state and the idea of creating a fairly uniform Jewish state, by necessity, when that idea won basically against the alternative ideas of Jewish empowerment, by necessity resulted in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And that's why I say it's displacement settler colonialism. And displacement settler colonialism, now we come to, if we agree to a diagnosis, and I'm happy to discuss why this is the diagnosis, it's discussed in that book in details. But anyways, if we agree, that's a big if, then you look for therapy, and the therapy is very obvious. The prognosis is also obvious because settler colonialism is very common. Every country had it. It's not unusual. And now that we destroyed planet Earth, we're talking about colonizing Mars. I just hope there is no living forms on Mars that we will be displacing. That's what Elon Musk wants to do. But anyways, this is the idea. What's the prognosis? Very simple. There are three possible scenarios, and I discussed them in that book. The scenario of Algeria, where 1 million French pack their bags and went to Europe. I don't say back to Europe. It was very traumatic for them. Most of them were born in Algeria. Many of them were 6, 7, 8 generations in Algeria. Some of them, many of them have never seen France in their lives, and they had to go. This was very bloody, cost something like 2 million Algerian lives and 100,000 French lives. This is a very rare scenario, and it's not going to happen in our region. I'm happy to discuss why it cannot happen in our region. The second scenario is scenario of genocide, as happened in this country that I'm now in. I'm in the Boston area, by the way, snowing outside. And in this scenario, there's a large-scale genocide of the local people, leaving 1 or 2% or so that are quote-unquote manageable. That happened also in Australia. But again, very few countries, very rare scenario, and it's also not going to happen in our country. Again, I'm happy to discuss why it won't happen in our country. The third scenario, which is the most common scenario, as a scientist I'm describing, not as a passionate advocate of one scenario or another. The third scenario is the most common scenario, and that's where the descendants of the colonizers and the descendants of the colonized live in one country. Not one state, by the way, I'm talking about a country. There's a difference between nation states and a country or a geographic region, and we can talk about that also. But they live together in one country. This happened in most of the world, like all of Latin America, all of Central America, Caribbean islands, and North America, Mexico, and Canada, all of Europe, by the way, every single country in Europe, every single country in Asia. My wife is from Taiwan, for example. Her family is actually not indigenous people of Taiwan. They are from the colonizers from the mainland of China. So she's descendant of a colonizer, if you want. So anyways, that's how it is in most of the world, including some countries in Africa also, like Zimbabwe and South Africa and many others. These are the three scenarios. To my knowledge, there has never been and never will be a fourth scenario, for example, with all due respect to Avatar, confederations or two states, PLO supported ideas. To me, it's good to have ideas. I'm not against having those ideas, and even I'm willing to sign off on them if somebody convinces me that one of these ideas will work to protect human rights. This is where I come full circle and I speak about human rights. Human rights, to me, is essential. You're not going to have peace without human rights. What are these rights? Well, I don't have to invent them myself. There are smarter people than I to develop international humanitarian law, human rights systems. There's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Actually, it was first draft of it was written by a French Jew. So anyways, that's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for example, is something that all countries theoretically agree to, but that's theory, you know. Very few countries adhere to it. I could count them on one hand, maybe. Most countries don't adhere to human rights. They just say they signed off on it, but they don't accept it. For example, the United States says we support the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but they don't have human rights, even within the United States, but that's another story. The same with any other countries. Okay, so if we want a roadmap to peace, we have to think of what are the human rights of the people there, whether they are Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Baha'i, Druze, or atheists like me. What is the nature of these human rights, and what are they? Well, again, take the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and go by it 1 point by 1 point. It's not very long, by the way. I put it in the middle of the book that you looked at.
Okay.
And it's very simple. You know, for example, Article 13 says everybody has a right to leave their country and come back to their country. That article is the right of Palestinian refugees, for example, to return to their country. They are not to be ethnically cleansed simply because there's a desire to have a Jewish state. And that's pure Jewish state, and you cannot dilute it with the non-Jewish ideas, if you want. That's a simple basic right that we should all agree to. If you can show me that these rights are respected under a political arrangement of one state, call it the State of Israel, for example, or one state, call it the State of Palestine, I don't care, or two states, or confederations, or any other arrangement, multiple states, or no state, for my perception is also a no-state solution. I talk about country, not state. But whatever the arrangement is, the political arrangement, if it does not respect human rights, again, think of it logically. How is that going to bring peace? Let's say you say, okay, since I mentioned the refugees, let's say you say, okay, I want to have a two-state solution, but the refugees cannot return to their homes and lands. You know, is this going to bring peace? Will these refugees be satisfied not going back to their homes and lands? And the answer is very obvious. You know, they're not going to be satisfied. So you're not going to have peace. You're going to have continuous bloodshed and mayhem. So you have to respect human rights. If, you know, another example, if you say, well, I want to have a Muslim state, and you don't respect human rights, you don't respect that there are Christians and Muslims and they have equal rights, then that's not a viable state. Or a Jewish state that doesn't respect, for example, the rights of Christians and Muslims in it. So you have to always look at human rights as pivotal and necessary ingredient for arriving at peace. Once you do that, and you implement it, you come to logical conclusions in the world, which is, for example, that the ongoing trajectory that has developed, not since 1948, actually, since 1890s, that is not a sustainable trajectory, and it leads to wars. And I wrote in this book, Sharing the Land of Canaan, this is one of my many books. I wrote another book on popular resistance, but anyway, in this 20 years ago, I even predicted a Gaza ghetto uprising, and I predicted more uprisings, and I predicted more mayhem, and I predicted regional wars that could lead to global wars. Not that I'm a prophet or anything, But as a scientist, you study the variables and you tie them together to understand the potentiality for something happening.
Yeah, Mazin, if I could just jump in because we want to have some
That's
give and take here, but no, there's more. I'd like to continue with these components of the human rights. I think it's really good. But one thing that keeps coming up for me is like sharing the land of Canaan. The word land is really the critical component where, in my work and some of the people on this team that joined us today, it's about bioregions. So a bioregion is another form of border that needs to be in the discussion because we say it's you didn't consider it a state and maybe it's not even a country, but bioregions, that's sort of a really strong foothold on the planet for generational abundance, right? Like the land can give us abundance in a region because, of course, we have the river here, which you said is almost gone. It's like a trickling stream now full of pollution, right? So you can destroy a bioregion pretty easily, and certainly if you confiscate the water for one region or one state, then everyone else is going to suffer. So peace through spatial justice, I call it. The bioregions are like spatial justice. It's the land itself that can support the population. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of chime in because I think it was relevant, and I know that's a big topic for you.
And it makes me think about, this land, the land of Palestine, if you want to call it Eretz Israel, I have no problem. The land is a land that's very ancient. Of course, humans settled there. Homo sapiens settled there about 150,000 years ago and has been a continuous inhabitation since then. There has never been, by the way, large-scale ethnic cleansing until the 20th century in Palestine. While the biblical stories are nice to read, archaeologically there's no evidence, for example, of large-scale ethnic cleansing by either side, let's say, or by any side in Palestine. The Canaanites certainly were not annihilated. In fact, the Israelites or the Hebrew-speaking tribes are tribes of Canaanites. Hence, I chose the word sharing the land of Canaan for a neutral terminology rather than sharing the land of Palestine.
Both lineages are Canaanites.
Yeah, so the ancient Hebrews are Canaanites. That is very clear from archaeological evidence. They are a small tribe of Canaanites, as is the Philistines, which was a larger tribe of Canaanites. As were the Jebusites who are around Jerusalem, built Jerusalem, Ur-Salim, the house of Shalem, the god of the Jebusites, or Beit Lahem. The city where I'm from, Bethlehem, is Beit Lahem, which is the Canaanitic god of sustenance, Lacham. So anyways, these are the people who continued to live there. Of course, they acquired different religions. That is understandable. Not just in Palestine, it's everywhere in the world. It happened. And so people of the land are people of the land. So my ancestors may have been Jewish or may have been pagan worshippers of Lacham and Shalem. But anyways, it doesn't matter. People acquire different religions and they live in their country. But the people lived in relative harmony with each other and with nature, by the way, for hundreds thousands of years. This is what gives us optimism. What gives us optimism is that this conflict is not emblematic of that's why I said take a patient history, because you don't want to have a congenital problem, God forbid. It's not a congenital problem. This is a conflict that's like a virus, like a bacteria. You can get over it. It's not like having Down syndrome, for example. It's much harder to fix the congenital problem.
Mazin, you have the virus. You have the vaccine for the virus, which is human rights.
Yeah. So I think, when you think about it, why am I optimistic about Palestine? Because for thousands of years, we had people of various religions and various persuasions, various backgrounds, various languages, even living in that area with minimal kind of problems between them. Any. And I can't think of any. For example, I cannot think in Palestine in the 19th century, when anti-Semitism was rampant in Europe, that there was anti-Semitism in Palestine. And I have yet to find somebody to show me any evidence of this or any kind of discrimination against somebody because of their religion, whether they were Christian or Muslim or Jewish, or Baha'i or Druze or any of the other religions that existed in our country. So I think that actually is a sign of hope. What some people like to do is give us, a picture which I think is very distorted. Somehow it's a complicated problem. People have been fighting each other there. And hey, this is a tough neighborhood, you might as well be very tough or whatever. This is nonsense. It didn't exist in our region, does not exist in our region. It's one of the most pluralistic society. Even when it was, let's say, majority Islamic rule, it was not the same as, let's say, other majority Islamic rule countries in other parts of the world. Certainly in India and Pakistan, there's issues of religion before even the British, but certainly the British fomented it for divide and conquer kind of ideas. But this was not the case in where do you see a conflict in Palestine, for example, a church versus a mosque or anything like that? It doesn't happen. So people have lived together in harmony, and they can continue, they can go back to living together in harmony, including for me also all the Jews in the world who want to live there. I have no problem. Palestine was always welcoming of immigrants. We welcomed, for example, Armenians. And, they are considered Palestinians. And this was long before Zionism and after Zionism. That's why there's an Armenian quarter in Jerusalem. Why is there an Armenian quarter in Jerusalem? You can say, well, these are foreigners. It's like giving a quarter of Washington, D.C. to Mexicans, that is... We are more welcoming of immigrants. When the Russian pogroms occurred in the 19th century, many Russians came to Palestine. We welcomed them. They learned Arabic. They became indigenous people like us, and they were more than welcome. The same in any other, Druze, Circassians, other people who came, Ethiopian Christians, and others who came to Palestine, settled there, Moroccans. That's why Palestine, as I said, before 1948, had 44 languages spoken, including Armenian. So I think we are welcoming of immigrants. We have no problem with immigrants if they want to live peacefully and equally with us.
Matt has his hand up. He wanted to bring a question.
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of touch on some of the things that you've said so far, because you've covered a lot of ground and some really interesting topics. So I wanted to explore some of those a little bit further. First of all, I appreciate hearing a lot about your personal background and your family. That really makes it so vivid and real, that all of our people really have these deep roots in the region. And I wanted to touch on your diagnosis a little bit. And so you mentioned the issue of settler colonialism. And I want to just ask you a question about that, because some people have the sense that the labeling of the Israeli enterprise as settler colonialism is in fact part of the problem, and that more of a recognition of the endemic nature of Jewish people. So you have people that came from Europe, you have people that came from across the Middle East, and you have people that were residing in the land, back in the late 1800s, 1900s. So I think, I think if everyone thought like you did, we'd have peace very quickly because you're imminently reasonable and sensitive to individuals and the diversity of people. And just like I completely agree with you on the idea of recognizing universal human rights and just seeing everyone as an individual. You also talked about the Armenian community. I've been to the Armenian Quarter and purchased some pottery there, which I have in my house right behind me. So you're right. It's like this concept of a exclusionary narrative is in some ways a more recent phenomenon. And I do agree with you that that is part of the diagnosis. So the key is, how can we embrace everyone's humanity? And that includes elements of endemicness and elements of having wandered and returned. So you have people who identify as Palestinian, who came from Turkey, from Syria, from Egypt, from Jordan, the places we now identify as those countries. You have Jews from Poland, from Russia, from Spain, from Tunisia, and other places, Yemen. So there's this, and then you have Jews from Svat, from Jerusalem, who have roots there going back millennia. So I want to kind of invite you to reframe it in a more
Yeah,
in a way that people really get the depth of it.
yeah. I mean, we have to be honest with ourselves. The first group that the Zionists set up to create this project, create a Jewish state, they called the Jewish Colonization Association. That's a term they use themselves. Herzl used the term colonization. Golda Meir, Ben Gurion, every early Zionist, Jabotinsky, they all recognize that this is colonization. At the time, the word colonization was not looked at as negatively as you seem to now indicate that it's looked at, or that it shouldn't be used, or something along those lines. Now, why do we have to use it? We have to use it because, as I said, as a medical scientist, I, I see patients, let's say, with chronic myelogenous leukemia. Chronic myelogenous leukemia has a very simple cure. It's called Gleevec. Gleevec cures 98% of patients with chronic myelogenous leukemia. So it's important to call a spade because that's what you are treating. If you try to obfuscate it or change it, you can get confused and not arrive at the real solutions that are needed.
Get misdiagnosed.
Now, and that was my next sentence. We used to meet in the pathology conference at the Yale University every Friday. And, good doctors can disagree. So we say, okay, this patient looks like this. Other doctor says, well, it looks like something else. How do we find a consensus on the diagnosis?
Mm-hmm.
You have to look at the symptoms and the tests in the case of medical things to see if they fit with the diagnosis. If they don't, then I, as a doctor, I can reflect and say, okay, maybe it's not that. Maybe I was wrong. Let's think of another diagnosis, okay? Now, let me give you a very simple symptom and ask you to give me the diagnosis based on just one symptom. In my village, Beit Sahur, the Shepherd's Field, we had a small revolt in 1988 called the Cow Revolt. Why the Cow Revolt? Because we brought 17 cows. One of them was pregnant. There became 18 cows. And this is against the Israeli military order that says Palestinian indigenous people cannot own milking cows. We can own milking mice, milking rats, I suppose, but not milking cows. Then the Israeli military started a military operation to find these fugitive cows, and they have to name their operation, so they called it Operation Hunt Cow. Now, I tell you this story because it's a very simple story. If you think about it, this symptom alone will address the diagnosis, many plural possibilities of diagnosis, and refute them by one. For example, if you say this is a religious thing, it's about Jews and Judaism, or it's about resistance by the Muslims and Islam, you know, the story, the symptom doesn't fit because these cows are not Christian, Muslim, or Jewish, as far as I know. And the owners of the cows, 70% are Christian, 30% are Muslim. So it would not fit a religious diagnosis. Does it fit, let's say, military occupation, which, with all due respect to Palestinians and Israelis who keep saying occupation, 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 kibush, kibush, kibush in Hebrew. Germany occupied France for many years. They didn't tell the French people they cannot own milking cows. The US occupied Iraq for many years and still does. They didn't tell the Iraqis you cannot have milking cows. So it cannot fit a military occupation paradigm as a simple symptom. If you think of displacement settler colonialism, that fits it perfectly. It's very logical. Again, not good, bad, or evil. I don't care to use such terminology. It's very logical that it fits a diagnosis in the same fashion as European colonizers in this country's, the United States, what became known as the United States, killed 2 to 3 million buffaloes. Why? Because the buffaloes are food for the indigenous people. They want the land. They don't want the indigenous people. It's as simple as that. It's logical. I'm not saying, you don't have to take sides if you want.
Good point.
You just analyze what is there. Now, I do want to address the issue of indigenousness because that's also something that frequently is stated. I mean, as a medical geneticist who works on DNA, I wrote papers on this. I'm happy to share with you. In fact, in the book, Sharing the Land of Canaan, there's a chapter called Biology and Ideology. I recommend you read that because it talks about this particular subject, relationship of biology and the attempt to use biology to justify whatever or not justify whatever or challenge science. And there's a whole body of Zionist literature that tries to, against scientific evidence, tries to prove somehow that Jews were this biological entity, this ethnicity that somehow dispersed from Palestine and now coming back to Palestine. The fact of the matter is biological evidence is zero on this. In fact, the biological evidence is opposed to this idea. European Jews genetically are primarily European. Yemeni Jews are genetically Yemenites. And Ethiopian Jews are genetically Ethiopian. And you don't have to be a medical geneticist like me to tell this, that an Ethiopian is an Ethiopian, black skin, what more do you want? So it's very clear that this is what it is, that Judaism is not any different than Christianity. Now, I have no problem in somebody saying, well, the roots of Judaism are in Palestine or in Eretz Israel, so I have a claim on this land, okay? I have no problem with that at all. I also have no problem in a Muslim saying Islam, third holiest site is in Jerusalem, so I have a claim also in Jerusalem. Or a Christian saying, hey, Jesus was born in Bethlehem, raised in Nazareth, preached throughout the Holy Land, so this is also, I have a claim as a Christian to this land. I have no problem with these claims. They're all can be considered valid claims, valid claims. but it does not give anybody, none of these groups, the right to come and remove indigenous people from their land and create a Muslim state or a Jewish state or a Christian state. It does not give them that right. It's as simple as that. And this is, again, basic knowledge. It is not a matter of bias in any way against a Jewish claim to the land, for example. As I said, we welcome Jews coming into the country, living. The country can accommodate people. It's not a problem of accommodation. I have no problem in the country having Jews, having Christians, having Muslims, having whoever. I have no issue with that. We Palestinians in general, and those among the Israelis, enlightened people who support us, have no problem with this. In fact, what are you going to do with an Israeli, for example, born there, and raised there, like Zohar, who volunteered at our institute for 2 years? I consider her a Palestinian, even though her nationality is Israeli, but she was born in Palestine. Okay, her parents or grandparents came as colonizers, but that's passé, that's history. We need to be talking about what it would take. This is where we come back full circle again to human rights. What it would take to ensure that nobody says, well, because I have a claim, my claim is stronger, and because of this, you guys are out, and Gaza can be ethnically cleansed, and the West Bank can be ethnically cleansed, and the refugees from Nazareth and Jaffa cannot come back, because if they come back as Christians or Muslim, then they will dilute the Jewish character of the state that I wanted to be a Jewish state. To me, that's racism. And I call a spade, and so I reject it. They are entitled to their opinion. I reject it with loving kindness, by the way. I don't hate anybody. Even the soldiers who arrested me, even the soldier who kneeled on my chest and cracked my rib, I have nothing but love for that soldier. I think he's, I consider him in a way like my cousin who's addicted to alcohol.
Mm.
He has a problem, medical problem, needs somebody to deal with it, and I try to help them. Many times I succeed, many times I fail, to help them reach the conclusion that this is not a way to live, that you have to rethink your direction. So you keep the doors open. This is where we come to the issue of nonviolence and popular resistance, where I think that's the secret for its importance and for its success, is that you are not hating individuals and you are not thinking tribally. You are thinking more inclusively. Doesn't mean you don't reject bad things they do to you. Even Jesus turned the tables in the temple, but Jesus said, love your enemy. If somebody hits you on the left cheek, turn the right cheek to them.
Mazin, we have a couple questions from the audience. I just wanted to, we're getting to the top of the hour, but there was a question from Tarek who said, could you expand upon the difference between country and nation state? And then I also want to add to that ethno-state. So just, can you articulate a little bit just for the audience and me?
I mean, in brief, human political arrangements, since we went from hunter-gatherers to agricultural community. At hunter-gatherer stage, I agree with Matt, we were tribal. There's this tribe of hunter-gatherers. But then we coalesced when we invented agriculture, and we had what's called city-states, which are not tribal, by the way, city-states. And then we had kingdoms. And then to replace kingdoms and city-states, we had the evolution of empires. And then in Europe in the 19th century, when empires became old-fashioned and kind of dissolved, Then you get the concepts of nation states developed. Germany with a German flag and a German borders and all of this stuff. That's a concept that's a European concept in the evolution of the thinking of human society. All these concepts, whether it's kingdoms, empires, nation states, are concepts that are acceptable in the time frame that they evolved until something else came to replace them. For example, in Europe, something else came to replace them. After the Europeans realized that these concepts of nation states resulted in three major wars, the Crimean War, and the First World War, and the Second World War, they realized that this concept is not really good for security or for anything. So they dissolved this concept of nation states, and now they are going towards a concept of local administration with open borders and the European Union. That's economic, social, and many other ways, integration of these nation states coalescing not in an empire, but coalescing in a mutually agreed to concept of coexistence. This is a human political evolution. A country is geographic location. The country of Palestine is geography. Even the Israel Academy of Sciences, by the way, published a series of books that are called Fauna Palestina and Flora Palestina. They don't call them Fauna Israeliana or Flora Israeliana because Palestine is geography. It's not a nation state at this stage, of course, unless they create nation states. And we can talk about that if you want. But Israel is a nation state, a la the European old concept of nation states that the Europeans are abandoning. And not only that, Israel is a nation state, a la the German model of a nation state in the Third Reich, which is an ethnocentric, chauvinistic, discriminatory nation state. That's what Israel is. Same as South Africa under apartheid was a nation state for the white people. You have now a nation state for the Jewish people. These concepts, again, they're not fixed in human history. They change, and this one will change, as is everything else changes. So who knows, maybe in the Middle East, as you call it, since you use the word Middle East peace.
What was the other word that you used? What?
In this region, in our region, it could develop into a model a la the European Union.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. So
between nation states as a model, a small step in human political evolution that's now passé, to a country which is a geographic region.
oh, beautiful. My vote's for bioregions, but Mazin, there's some exciting questions coming in from our audience. You're stimulating a lot of interest. I feel like we're sitting around the living room fireplace with our grandfather, our wise grandfather, getting lots of wisdom. But Matt has a question, so I'm going to hand it off to him. And
yeah, thanks, Peter, and thanks, Mazin, and I appreciate so much of what you're saying about the importance of just being willing to address each other as people. And the past is complicated. We can definitely say that. And there are different interpretations of things that happen and why they happened. I would assert that sometimes we're too hard on each other in diagnosing it's their fault. We filter things through our own lenses, and that can include communal lenses at times. So the question is, what's the way forward? If we, as we say, let bygones be bygones, let people have their views and their opinions, and also be generous with each other about where different people may disagree or see and understand things from their own experience. So if we go back to, let's say, 1948, for Israel, it's the War of Independence. For Palestine, it's the Nakba. So, but if we really go back and consider that people were doing the best they could. They felt they were in an existential struggle. They felt like justice and history were on their side. So, and you know what? Probably a lot of unnecessary suffering was caused by a lot of people. So mistakes were made, things happened, but like here we are today. It's almost 2025, and we get to ask ourselves, okay, what now? So can we just agree that the past is the past and it is what it is? It's, as we say, the what so.
Mhm. Okay, I mean,
Yeah, yeah. This is a good place for your optimism. We've got some. We're looking for the path to peace, Mazin, and we appreciate many drops of optimism you've brought to the table today. So bring us home. Bring us to peace, please.
well, it's very simple. There are 15 million Palestinians in the world. 8.5 million of us are refugees or displaced people. If you want to think forward, you cannot say, well, what happened in the past is in the past. It's really, what are you going to do about these people? How are you going to deal with those people? Are you going to deal with them by denying the past and by saying they were not refugees, they left on their own, they whatever, and they have no right to come back to their country because we want a Jewish state? If you say that, then we will have differences and you're not going to arrive at peace. But if you look at it objectively, even in the present, without assigning blame, you can say, okay, these are people from that country. They're not from Saudi Arabia or Egypt or whatever. They are from Palestine. They are Palestinian. How are you going to reconnect them with their land, Palestine? How are you going to re-attract them to their land, Palestine, and resolve the basic and underlying and most critical problem, which is the Palestinians' exile, diaspora, caused by whatever? I mean, we can argue about the causes, but it doesn't matter. Even if we don't agree to the events of 1948, even though Israeli historians have now come around to a consensus that what happened in 1948 was ethnic cleansing. I'm talking about even Zionist historians like Benny Morris, who says, yeah, we did ethnic cleansing, we just didn't do enough of it, we should have done more. So anyways, even if we disagree on that, which, as I said, historians don't disagree on it, then what is the way forward? The way forward, as I said, is basic human rights. You say that people have a right to return. There's international law. We didn't talk about international law, by the way. International law is very clear. People have a right to return to their homes and lands. They have a right also under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to be treated equally regardless of their religion or ethnicity or whether they're man or woman or whatever. So this is the idea of rights. And the rights, you see, this is essential. And I do want to say this because it's very important for us to keep in mind for any future arrangements. If you do not give people their basic rights, and at least begin to, you don't have to do full restorative justice. I'm not a favor of full restorative justice. Restorative justice, full restorative justice can be very traumatic. And as I said, we're not going to end like the Algerian model, for example, or anything like that. So you want to end up with some justice, but partial restorative justice, for example, reclamation of some land, go back to the issue of biocultural landscape. Palestine is Palestine. It had a biocultural landscape of biodiversity and human diversity. Both have been impacted in the past 76 years very, very miserably, including all the uprooting of tens of millions of indigenous trees to plant European pine trees, Pinus thalipensis, you need to have some restorative justice. In terms of the trees, what's that restorative justice? Okay, maybe you don't want to cut all the pine trees, but at least some of them have to go, and you have to replant original domestic trees like olives and figs and almonds and hawthorn and carobs and oaks to recreate the biodiversity of the landscape. The same thing for humans, in my humble opinion. And you have to also, for biodiversity, you have to let the River Jordan flow back again, become a river again. That's, to me, that's not negotiable kind of, we don't want to do it. No, it has to be done. And for humans, the same thing. You restore the human diversity. You respect the human diversity. You don't say, you know, Israel now has 65 discriminatory laws, even for Israeli citizens who are not Jewish. You know, the last one, for example, nation-state law says that only Jews have a right to self-determination in the land of Israel, and we must enhance settlements by Jews, etc. This is a racist law. It cannot stay in the context of any kind of solution, if you want to use a terminology, or path forward. And the way to do that is you have to, okay, you recognize the other's fears and perspective, and that's important to address. And we haven't addressed here, for example, the Jewish fears. I think a lot of it has to do with Jewish fears, and we should address it, by the way. It's very important. But at the same time, you have to be truthful to yourself and not delude yourself that cosmetic, treatments will work. If I have cancer and I go to the doctor and I said, I have headache, skin rash, and anemia, and he said, well, for the headache, take some aspirin, and for the anemia, eat some spinach, and whatever, the skin rash cream, that is not helpful. You know, it may make me feel better short term, but we are talking about long term and medium term. You know, is the patient going to survive? You know, and that's where you have to really be honest with yourself and address core issues.
Thank you, Mazin. I really appreciate your medical perspective. It brings logic and reason and peace of mind. I feel like I'm in the office. You know, I have a if I had a critical illness, I'd like you to be my doctor, because you would bring so much, peace of mind and calming and practicality. I would cut through my story and fear. So I really appreciate having you today. Matt and I are so grateful for your contribution and your work, your peace work as a peacemaker. It's profound. And I know a lot of the audience got a lot out of your perspective today. And so I'm just going to hand it back to Matt for a bit, and then we're going to open it up to questions. If you can stay, Mazin, the audience might have a few interesting Q&A section for us today. So Matt, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Mazin. And thank you for all who came to check out the conversation today. Larry, we'll get to your hand in a couple minutes. So just want to say, Mazin, I've enjoyed the time with you, and certainly heartened and optimistic for the prospects of some form of reconciliation. I think if there's any silver lining to all this war, hopefully it's that, not hopefully, we intend that it creates an awakening that something has to give, and that now it's time to recognize the universal humanity of all the people from river to sea, and find some way, whatever that looks like, to live together. And so at the Middle East Peace Civic Forum, we host these kinds of conversations, and we're really committed to very deep listening and just providing opportunities for people with a wide range of different views and perspectives to share and to listen to one another, and to have an open mind, and to educate our audience, and ultimately move the needle on peace, as we say. So I invite for everyone checking us out to go visit our website, MEPCF.org. We would love to get your donations, and that will really make it feasible for us to continue this type of program and to expand into additional programming and to really have more and more opportunities to have these very needed and necessary conversations. So please donate to the Middle East Peace Civic Forum. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our other conversations. And we're on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. You can like, follow, subscribe, all that good stuff. So please do that. And with that, let's hear from some people listening in today. Peter, will you facilitate the Q&A?
Yeah, absolutely. Tarek has to go, but it looks like he already asked his question, so we're gonna put it up. I don't see. I think Larry's hand is up. Yeah,
Yes.
Larry, you have a question, something to do with DNA, I think, which might be a good question for a doctor.
I'll start. Mazin, thank you so much for bringing such light to this issue. It's refreshing to hear logic and stringent logic applied to a problem that seems to carry so much emotion for so many people. So thank you. You have inspired me to read your book. That's first. Second, I was born in California, and I'm here in Israel for 50 years. I guess in your book, that makes me a settler, colonial Zionist. But I want to ask you about returning to the land. As a geneticist, are you familiar with the Cohen modal halotype? And is it a genuine way for us to see that there is a genotype? I don't know if that's the right word, but a genetic model for a group of people that used to be related.
Yeah.
Great question.
Very good question. Thank you.
I've got one more thing when you finish answering that question.
Yeah, sure. So no, I mean, Judaism is interesting in that it defines Jew as descendant of a mother who is Jewish, and that's what the Zionists also have adopted, except for one case, which is that there is the Kohanim, or the religious, rabbis who are original custodians of the temple, supposedly, that they are inherited as on the paternal side, on the father's side. And when geneticists looked at those who identify themselves as Kohanim, or as Cohen, if you want, they found indeed that there are similar genetics among those people who are descendants of the priestly class, if you want, because they were kept that way via the paternal genome. But for the ones that are supposedly kept Jewish by the maternal genome, the genetics of, and that's of course the vast majority of Jews, because not many Jews are Kohanim. And there's another group, I forget what it was called, Levites. The Levites who are also like that in terms of the genetics via the father, supposedly. But in terms of the genetics of overall the population, it's very clear. I mean, as I said, you don't even have to be a geneticist to tell this, that European Jews like Netanyahu and Jabotinsky and Netanyahu's wife are Europeans. They're genetically European. They're not Kohanim. They're not Levites. They're not Middle Eastern in any way, shape, or form. As I said, I respect their right to identify with the Middle East and even to come and live among us. So to start with what you said, you've lived in Palestine for 50 years. you are welcome to stay and live with us. I have no problem. But to do that, you have to accept that there is other people there in the country who have rights to the country by birth, by by actual genealogy. And for those people, I mean, Jeff Halper is like you, by the way. Jeff Halper, I don't know if you know who he is. He's an American Jew who's an anthropologist, came as an immigrant about 40, 50 years ago, was a professor at Ben Gurion University. He still lives in Jerusalem, left Ben Gurion University, is retired now. But his view is, I want to live here in Palestine among Palestinians, and I don't want to exclude them. I don't want to remove them. So I consider him my brother, and he and I demonstrate together. He and I write papers together. We have no problem. It is not an issue of, hey, just because you came from America does not mean that I deny you ability to live among us. But that is conditional, again, conditional on you accepting our rights and saying Palestinians, indigenous people, have rights to live in their country. The refugees have a right to return. And that's actually, for me, the litmus test between a Zionist and a post-Zionist and an anti-Zionist. There's, by the way, 3 categories. There's Zionists, there's post-Zionists, those who were Zionists and think, well, okay, like Abraham Berg, for example, who says, I'm not in the shoes of Ben Gurion or Herzl. I'm not going to be an anti-Zionist. I don't judge them. They did what they did, maybe in good intentions, maybe whatever. But now it's passé and we need to move on to become post-Zionist society. That's a post-Zionist discourse, which I support. Anti-Zionists are people who say the whole idea of Zionism from its foundation is basically a bad idea. And many of those who oppose it are Jews, by the way. Happen to be Jews, like Ilan Pape, for example, is an anti-Zionist Jew. He says the whole idea, even though he was born in what is called Israel or Palestine, but he is opposed to the whole concept of Zionism. So to go to the issue of genetics and mix it up, I am, this is also, I mean, I wrote in that chapter, we have to be very, very careful about this. Because you know who last used genetics for for racist reasons, So
Exactly. Good point.
So even though I'm a geneticist and I can tell you about genealogy of people and I can trace my own family going back to the 4th century AD, and that's only probably because then the Roman Empire converted to Christianity and stopped feeding us to the lions, so to speak. But, this does not give me more rights to Palestine. Let me put it this way. It does not give me more rights to Palestine than it gives an Armenian who was born there.
I'm not suggesting that I have more rights. I'm just suggesting that I do have rights as opposed to being a colonialist settler.
But this right, and Matt and Peter was talking to me yesterday about rights and responsibilities. It gives you rights, but there's responsibilities also.
Agreed.
The responsibility, I emphasize, is to shed any semblance of mental or psychological thinking of superiority of rights. It's very important.
Said that.
Okay, if you have it, I'm not
Now, let me ask you about returning. And by the way, it's interesting that when you mention Palestine, you use the word Palestine, and when you say Israel, you say so-called Israel. But I'm going to leave that for the moment, and I'm going to call it Canaan or Canaan.
Mm-hmm.
I live in Canaan, and so do you. And you are interested in enabling Palestinian refugees, I think you said 18 million in the world.
8.5 million.
Pardon me?
8.5 million.
Oh, 8.5 million in the world.
Not all refugees, some are internally displaced people.
Okay.
For example, people live.
A large number of Palestinians who might want to come back to Israel. And similarly, there are a large number of Jews who may want to come to Israel. Do I understand that the characteristic of the place that that is so-called Canaan will be fabricated according to the population that lives here?
Okay, I got your question. But before that, I want to make a distinction here on the terminology. In two of my books, one I called Sharing the Land of Canaan, the other was Mammals of the Holy Land. And again, I use Mammals of the Holy Land because it's a generic term.
Mammals.
A holy land. Christians consider it a holy land. Muslims consider it a holy land. So that's it. Now, in terms of Israel and Palestine, I just want to clarify because I don't want to misunderstand me. As I said, Palestine is a geographic terminology. Israel is not a geographic terminology. Israel is not a geography. Israel is not a distinct geography. Even today, Israel is the only country on earth that doesn't set its borders because I still think Eretz Israel may be between the Nile and the Euphrates, maybe the whole land. There's debates about this. So that's why Israel should be put in quotes, by the way, as a geography, not as a political entity. And this is an important distinction because as a political entity, Israel exists. One time a reporter asked me, do you recognize the right of Israel to exist? Well, there is no, under international law, there's no such thing as the right of a nation state to exist. They simply exist, and Israel exists. Whether I recognize them or don't recognize them is irrelevant to the question of the country existing. Do I recognize the right of the United States, where I am now, to exist? No, I don't recognize the right of the United States to exist, but the United States exists, and it is a country, and I hold its passport myself. Okay? So it exists, that's it. So it's a political entity, it has control of territory, and that's the end of the story. Now, with regards to the issue of Jews and Palestinians, let me be very clear. A Jewish person in Poland has the same claim to the land of Palestine as a Christian from Poland or anybody else from Poland. And they're all welcome to come and live here if they want to live here in our country. That is not a superior claim. That's the distinction. I want you to understand my point of view because it is relevant to some great misunderstandings when I tell you you can live here in Palestine with equal rights to us, but you cannot hold on to any kind of notions of superiority that Jews somehow have a superior rights to the land than Muslims or Christians.
We talked about that already.
No, but I'm talking about not the Muslims and Christians inside the country. I'm talking about Muslims and Christians outside the country. Okay? So they do not have, according to international law, immigration policies cannot say we discriminate in immigration based on whether the person is Muslim, Jewish, or Christian. I don't know if you know Israeli laws. Israeli laws are very specific about that, by the way. You can convert from Christianity to Judaism and acquire rights of coming and getting automatic citizenship in the state of Israel. But if you convert from Judaism to Christianity, you lose the right to come into the state of Israel. This is also another contradiction that Israel wants to have its cake and eat it too, or Zionists want to have their cake and eat it too, thinking that they are a biological grouping, and at the same time saying anybody who converts to us becomes part of Am Israel, the people of
Say
Israel.
that's a contradiction because now it's not biological. It's
Mazin, will you be answering the question about the character being determined by the population? When you say our country, do you include all the people who live here?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, thank you. Now can you address the issue of the future, the characteristic of that future place?
As I thought I was very clear on this. If the Zionists inside the state, whatever you want to call it, I don't care, you can call it Kingdom of Jerusalem for all I am concerned. As long as the person who lives in that country does not insist and implement a program of ethnic cleansing and exclusion of indigenous people, while insisting that any convert to Judaism or any convert to Islam, for that matter, has superior rights to the local people, then that is the litmus test. If they agree to the basic human rights, if you agree to them, then it's, for me, it doesn't matter where you were born even. As I said, for Armenians or for Jews or anybody else.
May I mirror what you said and tell you my understanding of what you said? That whatever population lives in this place, no matter what we call it, the people who live here will determine the characteristic thereof.
Yes. But that includes the refugees who were kicked out.
Thank you. I understand. It includes,
one of the reasons we invited
the refugees who were kicked out, and that includes the colonialists who want to come and return to where their ancestors were. It includes everybody. Correct? That's what you said?
No, again, you misunderstand. Let me give you a very concrete example, or ask you a question, actually. Maybe you can answer me. Do you think somebody who's Christian in France converts to Judaism should be allowed to get automatic citizenship in our country, Israel, Palestine, whatever you want to call it, get automatic citizenship, whereas a Christian in France, born in France, does not have that right? Do you think that that's legitimate distinction?
No.
Okay. Then we are on the same page, because immigration laws cannot distinguish
I understand.
on religion, period.
If you're on the same page, we don't need to explain further.
Yeah, we invited Mazin because he was saying, I'm open to many solutions and any solutions as long as human rights are present. This was really like core reason. Like, this is a fantastic, at least, perspective to be in the conversation for peace. And I think this is also an elevated conversation from some of the other ones we've had, which can get into the weeds of a lot of these details or different, outcomes. But this is elevated above whether you want a federation or a co-federation. Like, I think this is a distinguishing factor of how we can go together as a humanity in the future. Human rights and international law can be the litmus test, as Mazin said. So I'm really excited to have him here today and see where we go with this. Are there any more questions from the group? And are you complete, Larry?
Almost complete.
I knew there was a little something there. That's why I asked.
It's interesting that there are two groups who will shine above all others in your prediction, view, whatever. I don't know how to call it. And I'll call that, who was it in Palestinian history who said something about our best weapon is the uteruses of the mothers?
No, that was an Israeli who said this. Who said that the danger is the Palestinian birth rate. That was what's
I won't argue with you on the details. I'm sure you're closer to the truth than I am. So women who have a lot of babies, whether they be Palestinian or very religious, ultra-religious Jews who have 14 or 15 kids, those are the people who are going to determine in the final analysis the character of this place. That's interesting.
let me say something about this, which may be interest you to know what I think. I think if we keep going on the trend that has been going on for the past 76 years, Israel is moving, as you see, historically, you've been around a while and seen it change, more and more right wing. And this, the only way to stop this, the only way to have equality and human rights and for people to live equally is if the secular and democratic groups get together, Palestinians and Israelis, and Israel gives us
babies.
No, not have babies. We don't need to have babies. When you add us up, we are the majority. When you add us up, we are the majority, okay? The radicals are a minority unless you know they have segregation, unless you have apartheid, which you have within the state of Israel. You have apartheid. If you have inclusiveness, if, for example, the Arabs in Israel are included, if the Arabs in the West Bank and Jerusalem are included in a country of all its citizens, democratic vote will mean that it does not matter those ultra Haredim or whatever, or Muslims for that matter who support Hamas, they are going to be in a tiny minority. In the tiny minority, even today, without waiting another 20 years. If you keep waiting, it's going to get more and more dangerous. It gets worse.
We need a roadmap of how to get, we need you to help us figure out a roadmap of how to get to a point where we all of sound mind can unite to overcome the radicals.
Okay, you want me to tell you?
Sure.
It's coming right now, Larry. You don't even have to wait. Maz is very straight, very simple. He always says it's simple.
It's very complicated. The first and most important thing is education. The most important thing is for you to use the leverage of education. You within your own community, I within my own communities, I with this. By the way, today I am in Lincoln, Massachusetts. This is a Jewish house that I'm in. You know,
it looks like it.
Here is a mezuzah, okay? So I am staying with a Jewish friend of mine, and and this evening actually I'm invited to a Jewish meeting to address Jews in Massachusetts about the road forward. The education is important. Why is education important? Because it removes tribalism. Tribalism is the biggest danger. And sorry, Matt, to mention that you're the one who brought up tribalism. And you need to be aware, and if you bring it up in a way that you actually challenge it, not you actually, the way you said it, sounds like you approve of it. You said as long as the Jews think
if I may,
tribalistically. No, this is not the natural, I'm just saying it's not the natural form for humans to be tribalistic. It's not natural. It's the cause of our ills.
Yeah, I'm not advocating for or against. I'm just recognizing that it's part of the way that many people conceive of identity. And identity is a very complex matter, which we all have very actually unique identities along not just religious, tribal, spiritual, gender, and any number of other distinctions that we can make. And so our podcast is called Peace Tribe Rising. And the whole idea of the Peace Tribe is that the Peace Tribe is a common shared identity that all of us can embrace who believe in peace and transcend whatever narrow tribalism may exist.
Allow me to be critical of this whole concept. Even the concept of peace tribe, it implies that there is another tribe, a war tribe. And as such, you have a conflict, okay? I don't want to think of a conflict. I want to think of a resolution, right? So to think in terms of tribalism is itself engendering a conflict. With all due respect, to your formulations, I would formulate it differently and say, how can I and, and Larry, for example, how can we think as humans? As humans. Forget this, he's Jewish or he was born in the United States. So, yes, you were born in the United States, you're descendants of colonizers even in the United States, or at least you came to the United States, so you partake of colonization. Sorry, I am also like that. I came to the United States, I got my education. You heard my biography at Yale University and others where I worked as professor. I got my education at Texas Tech University and University of Connecticut. Those are all colonial structures. They are colonial structures that I benefited from. So I consider myself also a beneficiary of a colonial structure. To decolonize.
What is not colonial in the modern world?
That's precisely right. But what you have to do, this is the point I'm trying to make. You have to decolonize your mind. I have to decolonize my mind. How do I decolonize my mind? By not thinking of my identity is tied to my Jewishness, or is tied to Israel, or is tied to Zionism, or is tied to Palestinian nationalism in my case, or is tied to my Christianity in my case. No. My identity is a human being who recognizes that this is one planet that we are going to lose, by the way, either by climate change or by global nuclear war soon, that starts in the Middle East, that we could start a global war that you and I will not survive. There will not be winners in this global war like in the past. Cockroaches will be the winners because they survived nuclear radiation. And as a biologist, by the way, I have no problem with cockroaches. I say maybe that's a good thing because food it up.
They'll do a better job.
So Bill has been waiting very patiently to ask a question. So I would like to go to Bill.
Thank you, Matt. It's not really a question I have, Mazin, as much as a deep recognition of what you're doing. And you're saying that if you start from human rights, you're rising above all of the other structures of society. And saying if you go back to human rights alone and start from there, that's the best chance anyone has of reuniting. And I admire you for that. And I'm definitely going to read your book. So thank you.
Amen.
Yeah. I have to say I have some big takeaways, Mazin, especially I love decolonizing your mind. I think that's a profound vision. We can work
I wrote
with
two
that.
papers about this, by the way. I wrote a paper about liberation from mental colonization. It's intended for the Palestinians because many of them are mentally colonized. And then there was a girl, an intern, who came to my office and said, look, read your paper, it's very interesting, but what about the mental colonization of the colonizers. That's a very good point. And I realize this paper focuses on the Palestinians. So why don't you write a paper? So she wrote a paper, by the way, based on research. I'm happy to share it with you about mental colonization of the Israeli public, of the Zionists who support Israel.
Mm,
They are equally trapped.
right.
Yes.
It was
Yeah, this is a
Bob
good
Marley
point.
who said, Bob Marley said, free yourself from mental slavery.
So
Mazin, can you share with us about the history of your two kafiyot?
Of this?
You have two on you, right?
No, just one.
so one's green and red mixed
The
colors.
only thing I have,
Black,
Oh, it's
green.
multicolored. Okay,
like
got it.
colors, it has green, red, black. That's because I don't want people to assign me to a Palestinian faction, you know. The red was the Popular Front, you know, the communists. The green was Hamas or Islamists. The black was a Fatah movement, secular. So I'm all of this.
Hey, that's a good fundraising
And none of it.
Product for me.
Where can we find that product?
Yeah,
Where
we should sell those because that solves that. That's like a
buy a bunch of them and sell them because a lot of people ask me.
Where do we find that product?
This is made in Hebron. And
Yeah.
All right, Jess, go ahead with your cat as well.
Yeah, he's a colonizer too. No, Mazin, I wanted to know, what do you think, what are your thoughts or what do you think might be some solutions with the younger populations and what is going on in college campuses inside of these peacemaking solutions and what you talked about in decolonizing the mind and I guess decolonizing identity? What do you see might be possible for bringing the youth into this peacemaking process?
well, I mean, I think young people will find their way and they are finding their ways. I would distinguish, I don't want to make generalizations, of course, about young people in the US, but let's take young Jews in the US. They are pretty much, according to polls, they have moved away from their parents or grandparents' allegiance to Israel. They are moving towards a post-Zionist or anti-Zionist discourse. That's why young Jews in the US are leading those, tent cities and campuses. They're leading like the blocking of the Grand Central Station or Wall Street. Jewish Voice for Peace is the fastest growing Jewish organization in the world, but that's mostly by young people, not by older people. So I'm optimistic about young people finding their way and finding the truth and acting on it. Young Jews in Israel, I worry about them because their curriculum from childhood, and Tanya, what's her name? Tanya Peled Al-Hanan, who is a professor of education at Tel Aviv University, wrote books about this. Very good books. I would highly recommend them because I analyze how the educational system in Israel promotes racism and dehumanization and so forth. So the younger generations in Israel are exposed to a lot of doesn't mean they cannot escape it, they cannot liberate their minds. And I work with a lot of them. In fact, I was arrested, half the times I was arrested with Israeli young Jews who were with me in civil disobedience or in front of olive trees that are to be uprooted. So there is some who have managed to escape this indoctrination. And I think there should be more. That's why when Larry asked me about the way forward, and I think education is so important to reach out, to speak to people. First, educate yourself about what's going on and what's happening, and don't buy into all the propaganda about people can't get along or can't live together because of whatever. They give you a lot of reason.
Propaganda, yeah.
Yeah. If you shed these ideas and you yourself work towards that, Middle East Peace Civic Forum. I mean, let's talk about civic part of it. It would be great to develop civic programs that ensure, that people are actually shed this tribalism. That you can pass on the papers about decolonizing the minds that are there, and that can be very helpful to your audiences and to bringing peace. I'm not sure, did I answer your question or I lost track of your question?
No, you got it. You tapped into it. Basically looking at education, again, tribalism, decolonizing the mind, and then like you spoke about the curriculums. As
In the civil rights, Stephen Biko in South Africa once said, that the best weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And I tell this to Palestinians. In the civil rights movement in the US in the 1960s and 50s, there used to be a saying, free your mind and your ass will follow. So free our mind first and foremost.
beautiful.
That's good. I remember I love the Peter Gabriel song about Stephen Biko. It was one of my favorite songs. That's how I found out about him.
We didn't talk about the environment much.
We didn't talk about the environment. We're going to have you back, Mazin. And I think it's a whole topic that I definitely want to take on in upcoming.
Well, that's environmental peace building is very, very important.
Yeah, that's a great, that's a whole show or a whole series. And I can, it looks like I'm a little more interested in that these days than the academic stuff.
I read a little bit about wonderful peace work performed by Palestinians and Israelis around the Jordan River. And that's exciting.
Yeah, there's been some real success there. And I think even the website that we shared, I think that's the photo on the front of your website, Mazin, is like doing work at the Jordan, or it looks like a bunch of people working at a river. I was assuming it was the Jordan.
Our website, that's a pond near Jin Safut, actually. It's being threatened by settlements expansion. It has a rare toad in it that's not found anywhere else in the West Bank other than that area. But anyway, we can talk about these things. And the other third subject that maybe you would be interested in, I don't have to be part of this, but you should all discuss issues. How do we distinguish between normalizing and between joint struggle, and how normalizing occupation versus joint struggle? That's important, I think.
Normalizing occupation versus what struggle?
Joint
struggle. Got it.
Yeah. And Walid,
many Palestinians would say, hey, I shouldn't be talking to people like Larry,
Yeah.
So
we've talked about this in our organization.
What is normalization? What is normalizing occupation versus engagement, joint action towards peace? That's something needs to be dissected, again, scientifically, in my opinion, not emotionally and not defensively and not tribally, but in a methodological reconstruction of engagement. Engagement is engagement for peace. What's the best engagement for peace for the Middle East Peace Civic Forum?
That's actually the premise of this whole organization, I have to say, is engaging in conversation with those that don't agree with you is where the magic is, and creating the space.
That's why I suggested it as another topic.
Yeah.
In the forum ideas is how do you engage people who are reluctant to engage?
Yeah. If I was a reluctant to engage Larry also, but now I love him.
I rub lots of people the wrong way.
We actually got Larry in our organization because someone didn't like him in another one. And we're like, no, every organization needs a Larry. It's authentic.
Larry, be the bulldog, but don't go too far.
Mazin, it's been a pleasure listening to you and hearing your ideas. You have helped me free my mind, and my ass will follow.
That's the premise.
Yeah, let's put that on the website.
Yeah.
That's our new tagline.
That's how we'll go viral, probably.
Yeah, I like that.
We could title this whole video that what is it? Free your mind and your ass will follow. It'll go viral.
Stephen Biko, right? That was Stephen Biko's statement.
This I actually got from my grandfather. I'll tell you one last story. My grandfather, when I was 16 years old, he said, you have to free your mind from the shackles of religion, nationality, tribalism. The world is changing rapidly. You have to keep your mind open. This grandfather, before that, in 1967, I remember him. I was in his house, and this knock on the door came, and I went down, and there's two Jewish elderly guys. Later, I found out they were Jewish. But anyway, they said, is this the house of Isa Atallah? I said, yes, he's my grandfather. I was like 10 years old then, 1967. And so I brought them up, and as soon as they saw each other, my grandfather and one of the Jewish guys, they hugged each other, started crying. And I was like, what's going on here? Later, my grandfather explained to me that between 1948 and 1967, he could not go to his areas inside the Green Line, and Israelis couldn't come to the areas of the West Bank.
Wow.
My grandfather's second home was in Nazareth, actually. His wife is from Nazareth. So they couldn't see each other. So they didn't see each other for 19 years. And this guy sought my grandfather 19 years later. And again, it shows at the level of humans, we have no problems. Why should we have a problem? It's the ideologies and these silly concepts of us and them and we and them. And this is what we have to change. That's why I say engagement is always good. And I'm looking forward to tonight's engagement with some Jews. Some of them here are very right-wing Zionists, so that will be interesting. Won't disrupt or whatever, but I'm happy to engage with them respectfully. If they respect my views, I'm happy to engage with them.
Noah Harari speaks about the stories that we all tell. And we have to remember that they're just stories.
All of human consciousness is just a story.
It's a story planet.
Interesting.
Well,
very fascinating.
Yeah.
Very honored to meet you guys and talk to you.
Thank you, Mazin.
In touch.
Yes.
We acknowledge.
Thank you all for being here in this conversation. And this is the beginning, not the end, Mazin. So we'll definitely have to find ways to include you in our future programs and work together.
Okay.
Bye.
Peace.
Thank you. Bye.
Peace.